The human was bullied in class, until an Earth field trip changed everything. Marcus Chen sat in the back corner of Advanced Galactic Biology, trying to make himself invisible. The classroom buzzed with excited chatter as Professor Zix Thala announced the semester's field trip destination, but Marcus kept his eyes fixed on his data pad, pretending to take notes. This cycle's expedition will take us to Sol 3, the homeworld of our human exchange student. The crystalline Arctonian professor clicked through her vocal synthesizer. We'll study the unique biodiversity of what the humans call Earth. A collective groan rippled through the classroom. Marcus felt his cheeks burn as dozens of alien eyes turned toward him. The Valonian's tentacles writhed with disgust, the Krillian student's chitinous shells clicked dismissively, and the gas-form Etherians dimmed their luminescence in apparent disappointment. "Great, we get to visit the Death World," muttered Crixlon, a particularly arrogant Valonian whose purple skin constantly shifted patterns to display his emotions. "Hope everyone's brought their hazmat suits?" Several students laughed, their various forms of expression creating a cacophony of clicking, hissing, and electronic beeping. Marcus sank deeper into his seat, wishing he could disappear entirely. "The human homeworld is classified as a Class 12 death world," continued another student, a Krillian named Chitrax. 90% of known species would die within minutes of exposure to its atmosphere." "That's not entirely accurate," Professor Zix Thala interjected, her crystal facets shifting to a cooler blue tone that indicated mild annoyance. "While Earth does have challenging environmental conditions, it's precisely this biodiversity that makes it educationally valuable." But the damage was done. Marcus felt the familiar weight of isolation settling on his shoulders. It had been the same since he'd arrived at the Galactic University on Nexus Prime 6 months ago. He was the first human to be accepted into the prestigious institution, a fact that should have made him proud. Instead, it had made him a target. The truth was, humans were still new to the galactic community. When first contact had occurred 15 years ago, Earth had been labeled a death world by the Galactic Council's Xenobiology Department. The classification wasn't meant to be insulting, it was simply scientific fact. Earth's gravity was higher than most inhabited worlds. Its atmosphere was corrosive to many species, and its native life forms were considered unnaturally aggressive by galactic standards. Marcus had grown up hearing these facts, but experiencing the prejudice firsthand was different. To his classmates, he wasn't Marcus Chen, honor student and aspiring xenobiologist. He was the human, a walking representative of everything violent and primitive about his species. After class, Marcus gathered his materials quickly, hoping to escape before the usual harassment began. No such luck. "Hey, Death Worlder!" Crixalon's voice slithered through the air as his tentacles blocked Marcus's path. "Try not to kill anything on our little field trip, okay?" The Valonian's skin pattern showed amusement, but his 3 black eyes held genuine malice. Behind him, several other students had gathered, forming a loose circle around Marcus. It was a familiar scene. "I'm not going to kill anything," Marcus replied quietly, trying to step around the alien. "I just want to study the ecosystem like everyone else." "Sure you do," Chitrax clicked, his mandibles spreading in what passed for a grin among his species. "That's what all you humans say before you start your conquering and destroying." "My species isn't—" "Your species wiped out thousands of native species on your own planet," interrupted Zethmara, an Etherian whose gaseous form pulsed angry red. "The data is all in the galactic archives. Mass extinctions, environmental destruction, endless wars." Marcus felt his jaw clench. Yes, humanity had made mistakes, terrible ones. But they were learning, growing, trying to do better. That was why programs like this existed, to build bridges between species and foster understanding. "Every species has a dark history," he said, his voice steady despite the tremor of anger building in his chest. The Krillians had their hive wars. The Valonians practiced slave breeding for 3,000 years. That's different. Crixalon's tentacles flared outward aggressively. We evolved past our primitive phases. Humans are still in theirs. The circle tightened. Marcus felt his heart rate increase, his muscles tense. The physiological response that had evolved to help his ancestors survive on a hostile world kicked in automatically. He could smell the fear pheromones some of the aliens were unconsciously releasing, could hear the minute changes in their breathing patterns, could see the subtle shifts in posture that indicated aggression. These observations weren't conscious thoughts. They were instincts, honed by millions of years of evolution on a world where everything wanted to kill you. Marcus forced himself to remain calm, to keep his breathing steady. Getting into a fight would only prove their point. "I need to get to my next class," he said, moving toward what looked like the weakest point in their formation. "Running away?" Chitterax chittered. "How very human of you." Marcus paused. The insult stung because it touched on something deeper than personal pride. Humans had a reputation in the galaxy as cowards who only fought when they had overwhelming technological advantages. It was another stereotype that followed him everywhere. "I'm not running," Marcus said quietly. "I'm choosing not to waste my time on people who've already made up their minds about me." He pushed through their circle and walked away, ignoring the taunts that followed. But their words echoed in his mind long after he'd reached the safety of his dormitory room. That evening, Marcus sat in his small quarters, staring out at the alien cityscape of Nexus Prime. The city was beautiful in its own way, an impossible fusion of architectural styles from dozens of different species. Crystalline spires rose alongside organic biostructures, while energy beings danced through carefully contained plasma conduits that served as both transportation and housing. But it didn't feel like home. Nothing here did. Marcus activated his personal communicator and called Earth. After a few moments of quantum entanglement delay, his mother's face appeared on the screen. "Marcus, how's school going, honey?" Dr. Sarah Chen was a xenobiologist herself, one of the leading experts on alien ecosystems back on Earth. She'd been instrumental in securing Marcus's placement at the Galactic University, believing that education and understanding were the keys to humanity's future among the stars. "It's fine, Mom," Marcus lied, forcing a smile. "Just wanted to let you know we're doing a field trip to Earth next week." His mother's eyes lit up. "That's wonderful. You'll finally get to show your classmates what Earth is really like, not just the horror stories they've heard." "Yeah," Marcus said, though he wasn't sure his classmates would see Earth the way his mother hoped. "Mom, do you ever regret pushing for human integration with the galactic community?" Dr. Chen's expression grew serious. "Why do you ask?" Marcus hesitated. He didn't want to worry her, but the isolation was wearing on him. "Sometimes I wonder if we're trying too hard to fit in somewhere we don't belong." "Marcus," his mother's voice was gentle but firm. Every species that joined the galactic community faced the same challenges. The Etherians were considered too alien to communicate with for decades. The Krillians were feared because of their warrior culture. Even the Arctonians were initially dismissed as non-sentient because their thought processes were so different from carbon-based life. But they all overcame it eventually? Exactly. And so will we. She leaned closer to the screen. "You know why I wanted you in that program? Not just because you're brilliant, though you are. It's because you represent the best of what humanity can be. Patient, thoughtful, scientific. You're building bridges, Marcus, even when it doesn't feel like it." After the call ended, Marcus sat in the darkness of his room, thinking about his mother's words. Building bridges. Was that really what he was doing? Or was he just enduring abuse for the sake of an impossible dream? The next morning brought news that made everything worse. Professor Zixathala announced that the Earth field trip would be more extensive than originally planned. Instead of a simple one-day survey, they would spend a full week at various locations across the planet, studying everything from the deep ocean trenches to the Amazon rainforest. This will give us unprecedented access to Earth's biodiversity, the professor explained, her crystalline form shifting to excited yellow hues. We'll be working alongside human scientists and using both Galactic Union and Earth-based research methodologies. Marcus should have been thrilled. This was a chance to show his world to his peers, to demonstrate that Earth was more than just a collection of hostile environments and violent creatures. Instead, he felt a growing sense of dread. A week on Earth with this group would be a week of constant harassment, constant reminders of every negative stereotype about humanity. And worse, they'd be seeing Earth through the lens of those prejudices, looking for confirmation of their beliefs rather than evidence to the contrary. As the class filed out, discussing the upcoming trip with a mixture of excitement and trepidation, Marcus found himself wondering if some bridges simply couldn't be built. Maybe the gap between humanity and the rest of the galaxy was too wide, the differences too fundamental. But as he walked across the campus toward his next class, passing groups of students from dozens of different worlds all learning together, Marcus remembered something his father had once told him. John Chen was a history professor, specializing in Earth's pre-contact period. The most important discoveries, he'd said, aren't made in laboratories or through careful observation. They're made when people are forced outside their comfort zones, when their assumptions are challenged by reality. Marcus had always thought his father was talking about scientific discoveries, but maybe, just maybe, he'd been talking about something much more important. Maybe it was time for his classmates to have their assumptions challenged. The human was bullied in class. Part 2. The Transport Shuttle. Academic discovery dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of Earth's solar system, and Marcus felt his heart rate increase despite himself. Through the viewing ports, he could see the blue-white marble that was his homeworld, suspended against the star field like a precious gem. Around him, his classmates pressed against the windows with various expressions of curiosity and apprehension. Their comments, however, were less than flattering. "Look at all that water," Zethmara pulsed, her gaseous form taking on worried purple hues. "How do the humans not drown constantly?" 71% surface water coverage, Chitrax clicked as he consulted his datapad. "With atmospheric moisture levels that would be toxic to most civilized species. And those white formations in the atmosphere," Crixalon added, his tentacles writhing with distaste. "Storm systems. The entire planet is under constant meteorological assault." Marcus bit back his first response. What they saw as threats, he saw as beauty. Those storm systems brought life-giving rain. The vast oceans were the birthplace of countless species, a cradle of biodiversity that had produced the most complex ecosystem in known space. Professor Zix Thala's crystalline form shifted to scholarly blue as she addressed the class. "Remember, we're here to observe and learn, not to judge. Earth's extreme conditions have produced evolutionary adaptations that we simply don't see elsewhere in the galaxy." The shuttle descended through Earth's atmosphere, and Marcus watched his classmates' reactions carefully. As they passed through the cloud layer, several of the more delicate species activated their personal protection fields. The Etherians had to be contained in specialized atmospheric suits, while the crystal-based Arctonians required constant moisture regulation to prevent fracturing in the relatively dry air. Their first stop was the Amazon Basin Research Station, where Dr. Elena Vasquez, one of Earth's leading xenobotanists, waited to greet them. Marcus felt a surge of pride as he watched the professional, courteous way the human scientists welcomed their alien visitors, making accommodations for different physiological needs without making anyone feel unwelcome. "Welcome to Earth," Dr. Vasquez said, her words translated through the universal communication devices each student wore. We're honored to have you here, and we hope this exchange will be educational for all of us. The research station itself was a marvel of human engineering, built to have minimal environmental impact while providing state-of-the-art laboratory facilities. Walkways were suspended above the forest floor, connected by transparent tubes that allowed observation without disturbing the ecosystem below. As they began their first survey, Marcus noticed something interesting happening. His classmates, despite their prejudices, were genuinely fascinated by what they were seeing. The sheer diversity of life was unlike anything in their databases. "Professor," called out Lirashan, a normally quiet Sylvanian whose photosynthetic skin had shifted to bright green in the filtered sunlight. "These plants! They're using chemical warfare against each other." Dr. Vasquez nodded enthusiastically. "Many rainforest species have evolved complex chemical defenses and communication systems. That tree there releases compounds that warn other trees of insect attacks, allowing them to boost their own defenses preemptively." "Fascinating," Professor Zixthala hummed, her facets prismatic with interest. "This level of chemical communication suggests a form of distributed intelligence. But it was when they encountered their first Earth animal that things really became interesting." A three-toed sloth hung motionlessly in the canopy above them, its fur green with symbiotic algae. "What is that creature doing?" Chitrax asked, mandibles clicking with confusion. "It hasn't moved in 10 minutes. "That's normal for a sloth," Marcus explained. "They conserve energy by moving very slowly. They're actually quite efficient predators of leaves, which are nutritionally poor." "Efficient?" Crixlon's tentacles curled skeptically. "It looks dead." Just then, the sloth moved with surprising speed, snatching an insect from the air with reflexes that made several students jump backward. "Interesting camouflage behavior," observed Zethmara. "It mimics plant matter to avoid detection." Marcus was about to explain that sloths weren't really camouflaging so much as hosting an entire ecosystem in their fur, when their guide suddenly froze. Dr. Vasquez raised her hand for silence, her head tilted as if listening. Marcus automatically did the same, his human hearing picking up what the others couldn't detect yet, the sound of something large moving through the underbrush. "Everyone remain very still," Dr. Vasquez whispered. "We have visitors." Through the green shadows of the forest, a family of jaguars emerged into the clearing below their observation platform. The adult female was magnificent, her spotted coat rippling with muscle as she moved with liquid grace. Two cubs followed close behind, their movements still awkward with youth. The alien students' reactions were immediate and intense. Several activated their personal shields, while others backed away from the railings. Chitrax's shell plates clattered with alarm, and Crixalon's chromatophores flashed warning patterns. "Apex predators," Zethmara whispered, her form compressing with fear. "Multiple specimens. We should retreat to the shuttle immediately." But Marcus noticed something else. Dr. Vasquez and the other human researchers were calm, alert, but not afraid. They were observing the jaguars with scientific interest, not terror. "Look at their movement patterns," Dr. Vasquez said quietly. "See how the mother checks scent markers? She's teaching her cubs to read the territorial boundaries of other predators." "They're not hunting," Marcus added, his voice steady. "This is a teaching moment. She's showing them how to navigate safely through another predator's territory." The female jaguar raised her head, golden eyes scanning the observation platform. For a moment, predator and observers regarded each other across the gulf of species. Then, apparently deciding the strange creatures above posed no threat, she continued her lesson with the cubs. "How can you be so calm?" Chitrax chittered frantically. "Those creatures could kill any of us in seconds." "Because they're not interested in killing us," Marcus replied. "They're not mindless killing machines. They're intelligent, complex social animals with their own goals and motivations. As if to prove his point, one of the cubs began playing with a fallen branch, pouncing and wrestling with it in a display of exuberant energy that was unmistakably joyful. The moment stretched on, and gradually, Marcus noticed his classmates beginning to relax. They were still afraid, but they were also fascinated. This wasn't the savage, chaotic death world they'd imagined. This was a complex, beautiful ecosystem where even apex predators had their place in an intricate web of relationships. After the jaguars moved on, the group continued their survey with a noticeably different atmosphere. The questions coming from the alien students were more thoughtful, less dismissive. "The biodiversity index here is extraordinary," Lyra Shawn observed, her skin now cycling through various shades as she processed the wealth of photosynthetic strategies around her. "How do so many species coexist without constant warfare?" "Competition and cooperation often go hand in hand," Dr. Vasquez explained. "Species find niches, ways to partition resources that allow them to coexist. The complexity you're seeing is the result of millions of years of evolutionary refinement." As the day progressed, Marcus found himself becoming an unofficial translator, not just of language but of perspective. When Crixalon expressed horror at finding parasitic plants, Marcus explained the intricate relationships between host and parasite that often benefited both species. When Chitterax was disgusted by decomposer organisms, Marcus showed him how they were essential for nutrient cycling that supported the entire ecosystem. The real revelation came when they encountered army ants. The column of insects stretched across the forest floor like a living river, millions of individuals moving with apparent chaos but underlying organization that took Marcus's breath away. The alien students recoiled, seeing only swarming, aggressive insects. "Death March," Zethmara pulsed with revulsion. "Mindless destruction." But Marcus knelt carefully beside the ant column, his movements slow and non-threatening. "Watch carefully," he said. "This isn't chaos. This is one of the most sophisticated organizational structures on Earth." He pointed out the different castes of ants, each with specialized roles. The soldiers with their massive mandibles formed protective barriers around the workers. Scouts ranged ahead, laying chemical trails. Even the column formation itself was optimized for efficiency, with faster individuals on the inside and slower ones on the outside. "They're farming," Marcus explained as they watched the ants systematically strip an area of vegetation, driving out insects and other small creatures. "But not destroying. Look." He showed them how the ants' actions actually benefited the forest ecosystem, aerating soil, dispersing seeds, and controlling populations of other insects. What appeared to be mindless aggression was actually a carefully balanced ecological service. "Collective intelligence," Professor Zixathala observed, her crystal facets bright with excitement. "Individual organisms acting as components of a larger mind." "Exactly like your Krillian hives," Marcus pointed out to Chitterax, who had been watching with growing amazement. "These ants are problem-solving at a colony level, just like your people do." The comparison hit home. Chitterax's mandibles spread in what Marcus had learned was an expression of thoughtful consideration. "The organizational patterns, they are similar to pre-industrialization hive structures." That evening, as the group returned to the research station, Marcus noticed a subtle shift in how his classmates interacted with him. The outright hostility was gone, replaced by something approaching curiosity. Over dinner, prepared from local ingredients and carefully adapted for various alien physiologies, the conversations were different. Instead of complaints about Earth's hazards, students were asking genuine questions about adaptation strategies and evolutionary pressures. "Marcus," Lyra Shawn said during a lull in conversation, "how do humans cope with such sensory overload? The chemical complexity alone should be overwhelming." It was a good question, and one that made Marcus think about aspects of human biology he'd always taken for granted. "We filter," he said finally. "Our brains are constantly processing thousands of sensory inputs and deciding which ones are important. It's not conscious. It just happens." "But how do you determine importance?" pressed Zeth Mara. "In my species, we process all environmental data equally." Marcus considered this. "I think it comes from living in an environment where missing the wrong signal could be fatal. We evolved to quickly identify threats, opportunities, changes in our environment that might matter for survival." "Pattern recognition," Professor Zixthala observed. "Humans excel at finding meaningful patterns in apparent chaos." The conversation continued late into the evening, and for the first time since arriving at the university, Marcus felt like he was being seen as an individual rather than a representative of everything wrong with his species. But the real test was yet to come. Tomorrow, they would be visiting one of Earth's most extreme environments, the Mariana Trench. If his classmates thought the rainforest was hostile, the deep ocean would challenge everything they thought they knew about the limits of life. The human was bullied in class. Part 3. The deep-sea research vessel Challenger's Dream. Cut through the Pacific swells toward the deepest part of Earth's oceans. Marcus stood on the observation deck, watching his classmates prepare for their descent into the Mariana Trench with equipment that looked more suited for a military operation than a scientific expedition. 11,000 meters down, Crixlon muttered, his tentacles writhing as he checked his pressure suit for the third time. "The pressure will be over 1,000 times greater than standard atmospheric conditions." "And the water temperature near freezing," added Chitrax, his chitinous shell already sealed within a specialized protective casing. "No light, no breathable atmosphere, crushing pressure from all directions." "Sounds like home," Marcus said quietly, earning startled looks from several students. Dr. James Morrison, the expedition leader, was a marine biologist whose enthusiasm for deep-sea life was infectious. Despite being human, he moved through the ship's cramped quarters with the efficiency of someone completely at ease in this environment. "The abyss isn't empty," Dr. Morrison explained as they gathered around the submersible Deep Explorer. "It's one of Earth's most vibrant ecosystems. We're going to see life forms that exist nowhere else in the galaxy." The submersible itself was a marvel of human engineering, designed to withstand pressures that would instantly crush most galactic starships. Its thick titanium hull was studded with lights and sampling equipment, while its small observation windows were made from transparent aluminum strong enough to hold back the weight of 11,000 meters of water. "How do humans even survive in these conditions?" Zeth Mara asked, her gaseous form already compressed within her protective containment suit. "We don't," Marcus replied honestly. "Not without technology. But the life down there does, and it's been thriving for millions of years." The descent began slowly, the submersible dropping through layers of ocean that grew progressively stranger as they went deeper. First, the sunlight faded, leaving them in the eternal darkness of the deep ocean. Then the temperature dropped, and the pressure readings climbed steadily higher. Marcus watched his classmates' faces through their helmet displays. Fear was giving way to fascination as Dr. Morrison pointed out the creatures that lived in each zone of the ocean. "Bioluminescence," the marine biologist explained as jellyfish drifted past like living stars. "In a world without sunlight, many species create their own light for communication, hunting, and navigation." "Incredible efficiency," Professor Zixthala observed, her crystal facets pulsing with interest. "They're converting chemical energy directly into photons with minimal waste heat." As they descended further, the creatures became more alien, more adapted to the extreme conditions. Giant siphonophores stretched like translucent ribbons through the water, their bodies longer than any creature the alien students had seen before. "That organism must be over 40 meters long," Lyra Shan gasped, her photosynthetic skin shifting colors rapidly in response to her excitement. How does it maintain structural integrity at these pressures? Distributed nervous system, Dr. Morrison replied. It's not really one creature, but a colony of specialized organisms working together. Each part has a specific function, some for locomotion, others for feeding, others for reproduction. Chitrax's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. Collective specialization, like our hive structures, but biological rather than social. The real surprises began when they reached the abyssal plane. Here, in conditions that should have been completely sterile according to galactic standards, life flourished. Bizarre fish with transparent flesh swam through the darkness, their bioluminescent lures glowing like tiny stars. Massive spider crabs picked their way across the seafloor, their legs spanning distances that would dwarf most land vehicles. "Look at the size of these creatures," Crixalon whispered, his earlier fear replaced by scientific wonder. "In my homeworld's oceans, the pressure would compress any organism this large into paste." "Earth's creatures evolved different strategies," Marcus explained. "Instead of resisting the pressure, they work with it. Their bodies are mostly water, which doesn't compress. Their proteins are structured differently to function under these conditions. But it was when they reached the hydrothermal vents that everything changed. The submersible's lights illuminated a landscape that looked like something from another planet. Towering chimneys of mineral deposits rose from the seafloor, spewing superheated water that shimmered with dissolved chemicals. And around these vents, life exploded in abundance. Giant tube worms, their red plumes waving in the toxic currents, formed forests around the vents. Ghostly white crabs scuttled between bacterial mats that carpeted the seafloor in brilliant colors. Fish with antifreeze proteins in their blood swam through water that alternated between near freezing and boiling hot within the span of meters. "This is impossible," Zethmara pulsed, her form shifting through the spectrum of colors she used to express extreme emotion. "The chemical environment here would be lethal to any known life form." "Not lethal," Dr. Morrison corrected gently. "Just different. These organisms don't use photosynthesis like surface life. They've learned to harvest energy from chemical reactions, from the heat and minerals pouring out of Earth's core." Marcus pointed to a cluster of tube worms, each one larger than any of his classmates. "Those worms don't even have digestive systems. They have symbiotic bacteria inside their bodies that convert hydrogen sulfide into usable energy. They're living in partnership with organisms that most species would consider toxic." "Chemosynthesis," Professor Zixathala breathed, her facets shifting through rapid spectrums of color. "They've created an entirely independent ecosystem based on geothermal energy." "Independent from the surface," Dr. Morrison agreed, "but not simple. Look." He directed their attention to the intricate relationships playing out around the vents. Crabs farmed bacterial mats, harvesting them sustainably. Fish species had evolved specific relationships with different types of worms. Even the mineral deposits themselves were shaped by biological activity, with organisms influencing the chemistry of the venting process. "It's a complete ecosystem," Chitrax clicked, his earlier contempt completely absent from his tone. "Complex, stable, sustainable, in conditions that should preclude any life at all." As they continued their exploration, Marcus noticed something remarkable happening. His classmates weren't just observing anymore, they were theorizing, making connections, asking the kind of deep questions that marked true scientific engagement. "The pressure adaptations here," Lyra Shan observed, "they could have applications for deep space exploration. If organisms can modify their protein structures to function under these conditions." "And the energy conversion mechanisms," added Zethmara. "Chemosynthesis could provide sustainable energy for colonies in systems without suitable stars." "The collective behavior patterns," Chitrax contributed, "demonstrate organizational principles that could improve hive efficiency." Marcus felt a surge of pride, not just in his world, but in his classmates. They were seeing past their prejudices, recognizing the value of what Earth had to offer. But more than that, they were thinking like the scientists they were training to become. The ascent to the surface took several hours, giving the group time to process what they'd seen. As they rose through the layers of the ocean, each zone now familiar rather than alien, the conversations continued. "I need to reconsider my research proposal," Crixlon admitted. His tentacles moving in patterns Marcus had learned indicated deep thought. "The pressure adaptation mechanisms we observed could revolutionize deep-sea mining operations." "The bioluminescence efficiency," Professor Zixathala added, "exceeds anything we've achieved artificially. There are biotechnology applications we haven't even considered." When they finally surfaced into the bright sunlight of the Pacific, Marcus realized something fundamental had changed. His classmates were looking at him differently, not as the representative of a violent, primitive species, but as someone who had grown up in one of the most biodiverse environments in known space. That evening, back at the research station, the atmosphere was completely transformed. The same students who had mocked Marcus for coming from a death world were now peppering him with questions about Earth's ecosystems. "How do humans navigate such biological complexity?" Lyra Shan asked. "The chemical signals alone must be overwhelming." "The predator-prey relationships," Chitrax added. "How do you maintain psychological stability when surrounded by so many potential threats?" For the first time, Marcus found himself defending his species from a position of strength rather than weakness. "We don't see threats everywhere," he explained. "We see relationships, opportunities, partnerships. Yes, Earth is dangerous, but it's also cooperative. Species work together, support each other, create stable communities despite the apparent chaos." "Like the ant colonies," Zethmara observed. "Individual organisms creating something larger than themselves." "Exactly. And humans are part of that. We're not separate from Earth's ecosystem, we're participants in it." The conversation continued late into the night, but now it felt different. Marcus wasn't being interrogated about his species' failings. He was being consulted as an expert on one of the most complex biological systems in known space. Professor Zixathala, who had been quietly observing the interactions, finally spoke up. "Class, I believe this expedition has demonstrated something important. Biodiversity isn't just about the number of species in an environment. It's about the complexity of relationships between those species." Her facets shifted to the warm gold hue that indicated satisfaction. Earth's extreme conditions haven't created a chaotic, violent world. They've created an environment where cooperation and adaptation have reached extraordinary levels of sophistication. She paused, looking directly at Marcus. "Perhaps it's time we reconsidered what we mean by civilization. If civilization is the ability to create stable, sustainable communities despite environmental challenges, then Earth's ecosystems represent some of the most advanced civilizations in known space." The words hung in the air, heavy with implications. Marcus felt years of defensive posture melting away, replaced by something he'd almost forgotten, pride in his heritage. "Marcus," Crixlon said quietly, his tentacles moving in what Marcus now recognized as a gesture of respect. "I owe you an apology. We all do. We judged your species based on incomplete data and our own prejudices." "Fear," Chitrax corrected. His mandibles spread in what passed for a sheepish expression. "We judged based on fear. Earth seems hostile to us because we don't understand it, but understanding changes everything." As the expedition came to an end and they prepared to return to Nexus Prime, Marcus realized that something profound had shifted. He was no longer the isolated human trying to fit into an alien world. He was a bridge between worlds. Someone who could help others understand the complex beauty of his home. The journey back to the university was markedly different from the trip out. Instead of sitting alone while his classmates complained about visiting a death world, Marcus found himself at the center of excited discussions about potential research collaborations, joint studies, and new ways of looking at biological adaptation. "I'm submitting a proposal to study Earth's pressure adaptation mechanisms," Crixalon announced. "Marcus, would you be willing to collaborate? Your insights into the ecosystem relationships would be invaluable. And I want to research the bioluminescence efficiency," Lyra Shawn added. "Perhaps we could establish an exchange program?" Professor Zixathala's facets gleamed with satisfaction as she watched her students planning future projects. "This is exactly why we conduct field studies," she said. "Direct observation changes perspective in ways that data analysis cannot." As Marcus looked around the shuttle at his classmates, no longer seeing hostility, but genuine curiosity and respect, he understood what his mother had meant about building bridges. The bridge hadn't been built through arguments or defensive explanations. It had been built through shared experience, through showing rather than telling. Earth was still a death world by galactic standards. That would never change. But now his classmates understood that death world wasn't a condemnation. It was simply a description of the incredible challenges that had shaped one of the most remarkable biospheres in known space. When they arrived back at Nexus Prime, Marcus no longer felt like an outsider trying to prove himself worthy of inclusion. He felt like what he had always been, a scientist, an explorer, and a representative of a species that had something unique and valuable to contribute to the galactic community. The bullying was over, not because Marcus had fought back or proven his strength, but because understanding had replaced fear. And in the end, that was the most human victory of all, the triumph of knowledge over ignorance, cooperation over conflict, and hope over despair. As he walked across the campus toward his next class, Marcus smiled. For the first time since arriving at the university, he felt like he was home.